Honestly, I've been working really hard to get back to full health, and I feel like probably over these last couple of weeks is when I've probably started feeling my best. Obviously, my ankle kind of.
Have you ever witnessed a multi-million-dollar empire turn around and viciously attack the individual who finally brought about the complete miracle it had been pleading for decades? It was expected that Caitlin Clark's entry into the world of professional basketball would be a victorious, heartwarming tale of a generational prodigy taking an entire sport to previously unheard of heights. Veteran players had been clamoring for the mainstream media attention, special charter flights, enormous broadcast contracts, and sold-out arenas since the league's founding. However, a very toxic and angry atmosphere was developing behind the applauding crowds, the record-breaking item sales, and the flashing cameras. The rookie sensation was welcomed with a degree of jealousy, targeted violence, and orchestrated treachery rather than a warm welcome, leaving fans utterly astonished and radically altering our perception of the sport. The story quickly changed from celebrating her athletic prowess to depicting a sinister, behind-the-scenes conflict in which veterans plotted to dim her shine. The basketball establishment attempted to keep her out of the very spotlight she created, and referees turned a blind eye. It became abundantly evident that living in this league required more than just making shots from the logo. It required enduring a persistent, focused campaign meant to crush her will and subjugate her. However, those who conspired against her in the boardrooms and locker rooms made one grave error, and the consequences would completely rock the sports world. While she was still breaking television rating records in college, the hatred was simmering dangerously close to the surface and didn't only appear when she pulled on her professional jersey. A 22-year-old took over the sports world, as seasoned athletes watched from the sidelines. While they had spent years working in relative obscurity, frequently playing overseas during the off-season just to make a living, they dominated the daily headlines and secured multi-million-dollar brand endorsements. Whispers and backstage gossip turned into public announcements as soon as she formally declared for the draft. Prominent figures used well-known podcasts and news appearances to give menacing, barely disguised warnings that the novice would soon experience a violent awakening and that a harsh reality was on the horizon. This was a deeply rooted, almost institutional resentment rather than just the typical competitive trash talk you see in professional sports. The veterans believed that the enormous flood of new supporters was completely disrespectful to the league's history and ignored the pioneers who set the foundation. And they placed all of that annoyance squarely on one player's shoulders. The underlying tension was thick enough to cut with a knife when she eventually on the court for her first games. Every opposition team defended her with a degree of intense violence and hatred that much exceeded conventional defensive strategy, viewing their encounter with her as a profoundly personal grudge rather than a regular season game. Sending a message to the new golden child was a well-planned endeavor, but it soon got out of hand and turned into something far more deadly. What began as physical defense and full-court presses quickly turned into what appeared to be targeted harassment, culminating in incidents that completely shocked the sports media world. The unquestionable breaking point occurred during a widely reported, nationally televised game when the rookie was mercilessly crashed to the court by opposition guard Kennedy Carter-Savage, unprovoked blindside shoulder bump. The fact that the ball wasn't even in play, it was a dead ball situation, and that the hit was a planned, cheap shot intended only to cause suffering and disgrace was what made the moment so terrifying. Everyone in the arena gasped in shock, and as the replay played millions of times on social media, the internet erupted in fury. But far more startling than the actual blow was the officials' terrifying inaction when they were only a few feet away. At first, the referee reduced the obvious, deliberate assault to a basic common foul. In essence, it signaled to the rest of the league that the rookie's season was officially open. For what appeared to be a sanctioned physical attack, fans, well-known sports experts, and even casual onlookers erupted, demanding quick suspensions and severe penalties. Strong cries for the commissioner to intervene inundated social media timelines, highlighting the complete absurdity and hypocrisy of a league failing to defend the one player who is directly responsible for their unexpected financial windfall and skyrocketing ratings. In the immediate aftermath, there was a deafening quiet from the front office, leaving everyone to worry how far the veterans would be permitted to go before someone stepped in. However, the nightmare that was taking place all around her was far worse than the physical assaults on the court. The most agonizing and lonely part of the whole experience wasn't the blindside blows from resentful rivals. Rather, it was the extremely uncomfortable and severely damaged chemistry in her own locker room. Fans noted something quite unsettling in her colleagues' reactions, as the rookie was frequently thrown to the ground by cheap shots, flagrant fouls, and blatant shoves. If your great player is the subject of a cheap shot in almost any other professional sport on the planet, an enforcer will step up right away to face the offender and defend their teammate. However, her squad frequently turned away, stared at the ceiling, or barely responded at all rather than jumping to her defense. The visual optics were disastrous. It depicted a depressing image of a rising star who is incredibly alone and fighting a league as a whole, with no support from those in the same uniform. There were soon rumors in the media that her own bench was heavily contaminated by the extreme jealousy, which wasn't limited to enemy teams. According to reports, some seasoned colleagues were finding it difficult to accept their abrupt reduction to supporting roles in the enormous, unrelenting media circus around their new point guard. For the first time in their lives, they were performing in NBA-sized arenas that were completely sold out, yet they were aware that no one was watching them. She had to face a harsh reality as a result of her excruciating seclusion. She was unable to rely on the idea of brotherhood and sisterhood on the court or the customary unwritten rules of team sports. She had to navigate a very unstable shark-infested environment on her own, where even a pleasant face in the locker room could be hiding long-standing animosity. And just when it appeared impossible for things to get any more complicated or nasty, the final betrayal was planned in secret behind closed doors. During the much-awaited voting procedures for the game's most esteemed awards, this concerted campaign of disdain reached its highest point. She was the unquestioned face of the All-Star Game thanks to an unprecedented and astounding number of votes cast by fans worldwide. With figures the league had never seen in its multi-decade history, she utterly broke all previous voting records and proved beyond a shadow of a doubt who the fans wanted to see. However, the startling disparity revealed a deeply ingrained, indisputable conspiracy when the media and peer vote results were eventually made public. In a nasty, coordinated attempt to destroy her total ranking and deprive her the captaincy she so richly deserved, a significant number of her peers and rival coaches had deliberately omitted her completely off their ballots. It was an obvious, deliberate slap in the face from the establishment. When the National Olympic Selection Committee proudly unveiled their hotly contested lineup for the Summer Games in Paris, this subtle voter treachery was amplified tenfold. She was inexplicably left off the national team despite being the largest television draw in women's sports history, an indisputable generational talent, and the only reason millions of people were suddenly paying attention. The committee made a valiant effort to conceal themselves behind weak justifications about defensive mismatches, foreign experience, and conventional roster formation, but the public throughout the world was able to see right through the pitiful smokescreen. It was the old guard's ultimate, unambiguous power move, a last-ditch effort to demonstrate their waning dominance and remind youngsters that they still held the heavily guarded gates of basketball immortality. This was a purposeful public humiliation intended to put her in her proper position on a worldwide platform, not merely a roster snub. But it's a very risky game to put a once-in-a-lifetime, fiercely competitive player in a tight spot, and the league was going to discover why. The league's front office was discreetly thrown into a state of complete, unabated terror, while committees were preventing her from receiving important awards and players were busy planning their small-time retaliation. The executives were staring at the terrifying truth of the financial spreadsheets and television analytics while seated in their glass offices. The information was completely indisputable and crystal clear. Networks absolutely broke viewing records during her performance, and product warehouses sold out in a matter of minutes. And enormous arenas were crammed to capacity, with yelling spectators purchasing exorbitant tickets. However, the numbers drastically fell back to the dark days of the league's obscurity when she sat down, or worse, when she was incapacitated by the constant physical abuse and cheap shots. The executives abruptly came to the terrifying realization that their experienced players' unbridled physical aggressiveness and petty jealousies were directly endangering a multi-billion-dollar television rights bargain that would determine the sport's future. Behind closed doors, emergency meetings were quickly and covertly called. The league could no longer afford to leave the facility in the hands of the prisoners. They started discreetly awarding retroactive flagrant fouls, imposing large hidden penalties, and threatening important players with harsh, season-altering punishments if the targeted non-basketball attacks persisted without making significant public announcements. Referees were gently but firmly told to stop ignoring the obvious hazing that was destroying their broadcast product, stiffen their whistles, and take charge of the games. At last, the message from the top of the corporate hierarchy was quite clear. Your future, your profession, and your money are all at stake if you touch the golden goose once more. The young star at the center of the storm wasn't just waiting for the corporate office to save her, even if the league's power structure was rapidly changing. She chose to fully weaponize the extreme disrespect rather than crumble beneath the overwhelming, oppressive weight of the ongoing treachery, the excruciating loneliness, and the incessant physical abuse she experienced every single night. She gave up attempting to appease the resentful veterans and stopped looking to the established old guard for approval. Instead, she chose to let her game speak for itself in the most explosive and devastating way possible. Her sharpest detractors were left dumbfounded and searching for an excuse when the rookie went on an absolutely historic tear. Night after night, she started dropping incredible video game-like statistics, coordinating the attack with a deadly, surgical accuracy that was impossible for anyone to stop. She made history by becoming the first rookie in the league's history to record a highly sought-after triple-double, thoroughly destroying top-tier opponents' defenses while appearing effortlessly fluid. She was out for absolute blood on the stat sheet, though, and she didn't stop there. By threading impossible, needlepoint passes through the narrowest defensive windows, she utterly broke the single-game assist record, demonstrating beyond a shadow of a doubt that her basketball IQ was far superior to that of the veterans who smugly said she wouldn't be able to adapt to the professional pace. Each deep logo three-pointer she made felt like a blazing dagger pointed right at the center of the basketball establishment. She was unavoidably reminded of her unquestionable superiority on the court with each brilliant, no-look assist. She was no longer merely surviving the extremely hostile environment. Instead, she was totally controlling it and compelling those who had planned against her to vote against her, and physically assaulted her while they watched helplessly as she created history on her own. The whole professional basketball landscape has been permanently changed by this unparalleled, tumultuous tale of deep-seated jealousy, startling treachery, and ultimately unquestionable vindication. The well-planned measures to disrupt a new phenomena spectacularly backfired, serving only to increase her legendary stature while brutally revealing to millions of new viewers the sport's nasty, ugly underbelly. The hostile players who attempted to physically threaten her have gradually vanished into the background and will always be remembered as the resentful antagonists in a vast narrative that they had no control over. She was unintentionally given the best, most captivating underdog story in contemporary sports history by the old guard, who tried to rig the voting procedures and prevent her from winning an Olympic medal. This made her even more adored by the fans. In order to keep up with her enormous orbit, she forced a whole professional sports league to drastically alter its rules, officiating standards, corporate priorities, and financial model in addition to surviving the grueling rookie gauntlet. Seeing her competitors suspended, fined, or publicly humiliated by the media was hardly the ultimate crushing retaliation. Every night, she would glance up at the Jumbotron scoreboard and know without a doubt that she had complete control over the sport's financial security and destiny. Genuine, generational brilliance will always triumph over coordinated pettiness, as she had demonstrated by defeating the severely contrived system and overcoming the noise. As we watch her continue to rule, it leaves us all with an intriguing, unanswered question. How long will it take for the rest of the league to swallow their pride and acknowledge that they need her far more than she will ever need in a business so heavily driven by brittle egos and ferocious pride? Have you ever witnessed a multi-million-dollar empire turn around and viciously attack the individual who finally brought about the complete miracle it had been pleading for decades? It was expected that Caitlin Clark's entry into the world of professional basketball would be a victorious, heartwarming tale of a generational prodigy taking an entire sport to previously unheard-of heights. Veteran players had been clamoring for the mainstream media attention, special charter flights, enormous broadcast contracts, and sold-out arenas since the league's founding. However, a very toxic and angry atmosphere was developing behind the applauding crowds, the record-breaking item sales, and the flashing cameras. The rookie sensation was welcomed with a degree of jealousy, targeted violence, and orchestrated treachery rather than a warm welcome, leaving fans utterly astonished and radically altering our perception of the sport. The story quickly changed from one of athletic brilliance to one of a sinister, covert conflict in which veterans plotted to dull her light. The basketball establishment attempted to keep her out of the very spotlight she